We'll continue with our program. The next panel is on learning lessons from the HIV/AIDS struggle for a people's vaccine. I'd like to invite Comrade Mazibuko Jara from South Africa. Mazibuko was the founding chairperson of the Treatment Action Campaign. Mazibuko, over to you.
Good afternoon, comrades. Thank you very much for hosting this important assembly. It's quite important that we take forward the struggle. This moment of crisis, like we learned in the struggle against AIDS, can be a moment where we mobilize the mass power of ordinary people to impact on both the state, on the pharmaceutical industry as well, but also importantly, on the world trade regime. These are the three important lessons which we want to bring forward from the struggle against HIV and AIDS in South Africa. Firstly, we are to focus on the need to save lives. That was crucial. It is also crucial now in the struggle against COVID. We have seen the impact. That focus on lives is important. Many speakers have already explained how neoliberalism has impacted on how lives of ordinary people get poorer and poorer and weaker under neoliberalism. So we cannot forget that focus on lives. Secondly, the politics, the economics, and the science of HIV, of AIDS, of treatment, and also of access to treatment was very important for ordinary activists to understand how these things interconnect. I think the COVID-19 pandemic also calls for a similar approach where we go to the heart of the problem, the political economy, the science, and also then work out ways in which we can ensure that information, knowledge, expertise about those things gets demystified. It gets to the power of ordinary people. Importantly, also in the struggle against HIV/AIDS, what we emphasized in South Africa and even elsewhere in the world was the need to build mass power. It's not going to be the boardrooms, it's not going to be Zoom meetings, all of those are important, but as difficult as the COVID-19 moment is for organizing in the ordinary way, we have to think of new ways in which we can bring the mass power of ordinary people to bear on the state, to bear on the pharmaceutical industry, to bear on the world trade regime, where these things are decided. So for me, those are the three crucial lessons which I think we can adapt and apply in our current moment. Without that, I think then we will be wasting our time, because ultimately these governments are not going to listen if we do not have a real mass voice on the ground. But that mass power on the ground has to be informed, has to be educated, has to organize, has to have a strategy. And I think various elements of that are beginning to emerge. But all of that strategy has to speak to the question of alternatives. In the struggle against HIV/AIDS, we're to begin to go beyond the state, where, for example, the National Strategic Plan, which now is official policy of government, had to emerge from grassroots platforms, in church halls, in community meetings, people speaking openly about what they wanted to see, and also acting out what they wanted to see by occupying hospitals, by occupying clinics, by occupying government offices, and even also going to occupy the offices of pharmaceutical companies in the big centers of Johannesburg, and even going to court to ensure that it's not just the mass occupation, but also it's accompanied by something with legal force. So I think those are some of the strategies which we have to adapt to our context right now. Without going too far, I'll keep it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mazibuko. Our next speaker is Lois Chingandu from Frontline AIDS, and they also a partner in the Global People's Vaccine Campaign. Over to you, Lois.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about the reason why the people's vaccine is very important for ending HIV. To start with, AIDS is not over, and therefore, even though our attention has been diverted by COVID, we should not forget that HIV is still a life-threatening disease. What we want to take from HIV, which is very important, is to learn from history and not allow history to repeat itself, particularly right in front of our eyes. When the COVID vaccine came on, we who lived through the HIV era immediately saw the similarities, the selfishness that took place during the HIV era, and allowed thousands and millions of people to die unnecessary deaths. Why? Because of these pharmaceuticals and all these complicated laws and policies that are just put there at the expense of human life. It's also important that we end COVID in order for us to protect the gains and the investments that we've put in HIV. And when I'm not talking about just financial investments, I'm talking about human investments. We have huge structures and systems from the top right up to the grassroots level that we designed to fight HIV. And we need to protect those structures because, as another speaker said earlier, they can easily be adapted and adopted to respond to COVID and to push the vaccines right up to the periphery where marginalized communities are found. We can also not allow COVID to continue to erode our economies because we know the strong linkages that exist between HIV and poverty. And if we allow people to go into deeper poverty, it just means we are going to end up with a new emerging HIV huge crisis than what we have at the moment. And so it's very important for HIV movements and individual activists who were there in the battle of fighting for HIV treatment to come back to the front line because you are needed right now for us to fight again for the vaccine, to get the vaccine to everybody as soon as we can so that we can end COVID. We can also really learn from our previous experience. We know that inequalities really drive HIV. And what we are seeing with COVID is again an increase in inequalities. And this, unjust division and access and problems to just make sure that the vaccine is available universally is in itself creating new inequalities. And we know those inequalities will fuel HIV and they will also fuel COVID. 3 things we must take from HIV. One is the voice of the people. During HIV, it was the people who went into the street, who toyed, who spoke, who fought, and until we won. It was the people's anger that changed everything. And therefore, when we are talking about advocacy for vaccine, we need to get the people on board and we need to hear their voices need to be heard. The second thing is that during HIV, we created a medicine patent pool for HIV drugs, and that's the reason why they ended up affordable. With COVID, WHO has created CTEP, and we can see the politics that is beginning to be at play to avoid CTEP being funded and to make sure that it becomes successful. Because we know if it's allowed to flourish, through it, we can actually make vaccines more widely available. The last thing is with HIV, we learned that strong community and health systems are critical. And yet our understanding of COVID is that it is actually decimating all those systems. The health systems are going, the community systems are going. So if we do not stop COVID, we are going to end up with very weak system. And then we have to start afresh for any other, beside HIV, for any other crisis, health crisis that we have. We need the systems to remain in place. So my last call is again to reinforce and call on HIV movements and activists. You have the experience, you know what to do, you remember at the HIV/AIDS conferences, we would destroy those pharmaceutical stands. That was our anger. We need to re-energize that anger again. Let's bring it back into this battle. This is a very similar battle, and there's no reason why we should shy away from it. We need to be at the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. I'm going to hand over to Anne Marriott. She's the chief campaigner for health issues in Oxfam. She's also been integrally involved in the People's Vaccine campaigning work on a global scale. And she'll also give us an update on what's happening globally and and share with us the call for a people's vaccine. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and what a privilege it is to share the platform with so many amazing speakers today. The situation we are in today, that of vaccine apartheid, was as predictable as it is totally unacceptable. In rich countries, one person is being vaccinated every second, yet the majority of developing countries have yet to see a single dose. And from the very outset of this pandemic, many, many of us were calling for conditions to be placed on the billions of public funding being spent on the research and development for these vaccines, shouting very loudly that there should be no blank checks. So many of us were saying that the science being funded by our taxes should be free of intellectual property barriers, global public goods. And why? Because we all knew that the world has not had to make vaccines for everybody on the planet all at once before. We all knew that the medicine system that we have consistently puts the profits of pharmaceutical corporations ahead of people's lives. And we all still rage with the injustice of inaccessible treatment for HIV, responsible for the needless loss of millions of lives. And so many people around the world continue to die today because the pockets of shareholders are always put first. And you know, we saw many world leaders lining up last April at a series of global summits to declare that any successful vaccine, if developed, would be a global public good. And 11 months on, so far they have completely failed to deliver that. And it was early recognition that blank checks were being written using our taxes, and that nothing but crumbs of charity were on the table to fix the inevitable shortages of vaccine and the inevitable vaccine inequality that we see today that led to the formation of the People's Vaccine Campaign, a campaign that was kicked off last May with a letter from over 140 leading public figures around the world, including former leaders such as Gordon Brown and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and current leaders, including Imran Khan, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Macky Sall. And they were joined by many leading economists and thinkers, including Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz and Mariana Mazzucato. The call for a people's vaccine is summed up with three asks: that COVID-19 vaccines must be universally available, distributed equitably according to need and not ability to pay, and they should be free of charge for everybody on the planet. 2, that the vaccine science and know-how, the vaccine blueprints, should be openly shared, free of intellectual property barriers, so that qualified manufacturers around the world can join in the effort of producing them. And thirdly, that we need a global vaccine manufacturing and distribution plan for cost price, not profit price vaccines, with needed investment in production capacity and health workers. And in this, we are calling for priority attention to manufacturing and health workers in developing countries. Unfortunately, these asks remain as relevant and urgently needed today as they did last May. And today we have a situation where, on average, as many people have said, rich countries have enough to vaccinate their entire populations 3 times over. And in the majority of developing countries, 9 in 10 people are set to miss out on a vaccine this year. And today we have 2 concrete mechanisms on the table to help us get to a people's vaccine. But as we've heard again, a handful of pharmaceutical corporations and a small number of rich countries are standing in their way. The first, as many have commented, is a proposal backed by over 100 countries at the World Trade Organization to temporarily suspend the intellectual property rights of pharmaceutical corporations. We know that rich countries continue to block that proposal, but the struggle is not over. It has been kicked into the long grass by those rich countries just last week at the last TRIPS Council meeting, but the discussions will continue. There are more meetings in April and another formal meeting in June, and we have to build our fight to confront that opposition at those moments. The second is a mechanism at the World Health Organization that Lois was talking about called CTAP. This is a pool set up for sharing COVID-related IP, technology, and know-how to transfer the recipes for these vaccines, as well as tests and treatments, to other qualified manufacturers. And so far, not one pharmaceutical corporation has come forward to join the pool. As rich country leaders and the pharmaceutical industry continue to block these solutions and attempt to distract the world with inadequate charitable solutions, our People's Vaccine campaign has grown and grown, and momentum really is on our side. The Vaccine Alliance, the People's Vaccine Alliance, is now well over 50 organizations from all over the world, including UNAIDS, Amnesty International, Public Citizen, Oxfam, the Fight Inequality Alliance, Section 27, Frontline AIDS, Public Services International, many of you who are here today. We are leading figures in public life, including the Archbishop of Cape Town, Graça Machel, Moussa Faki, Bernie Sanders, Mohammed Yunus, Chelsea Clinton, and Rebecca Greenspan, to name just a few. And we are truly working to influence parliaments and governments everywhere, and especially those who house the pharmaceutical corporations who are unwilling to share. We have engaged journalists with eye-watering statistics and stories, and they are starting to do our work for us, asking the power holders the difficult questions, holding them to account, doing their own investigations into the injustices perpetrated by the pharmaceutical industry. And we are targeting pharmaceutical corporations themselves, pressuring them to put people before profits at every turn. And just this week, on the anniversary of the declaration of the pandemic, we held our second People's Vaccine Day of Action, with public demonstrations outside pharma headquarters in South Africa and Switzerland, in the UK and the US, with press conferences and press work in at least 30 countries. The People's Vaccine was trending on social media for much of the day, and we hosted 2 amazing global rallies where we heard from leading public figures alongside patients and health workers on the front lines, and where Bernie Sanders formally endorsed our campaign. And we do know that the pressure is being felt. It's working. People can see that the charitable fixes are not fixing the problem. Pharmaceutical corporations are having to resort to public letters to President Biden, pleading with him to stand his ground on intellectual property, a sign that they're worried their heavily financed inside lobbying track is not working so well. Leaders are showing signs of wobble as the stark inequalities are impossible to hide, and supplies, even in rich countries, have been hit by delays because of our united high dependence on a handful of pharmaceutical corporations. But we're nowhere near naive. We know the struggle for affordable HIV treatment took a decade and still continues on many fronts. We know that the vested interests are huge and will obstruct change at every turn. But we also know it's a fight we have to win, and as quickly as possible. And it's a fight that can truly unite us across the world, because it is actually true that no one is safe until we all are. We are joined in a common interest to end this pandemic. And this fact brings huge opportunity for solidarity and for victory. And I hope not just a victory for COVID-19 vaccines, but a victory that shifts the landscape possible for a future medicines model that better serves the right to health for all of us. And now really is the time to win this. I feel the next few months are absolutely critical for this struggle. And it's people power, as others have said, organized people power that will make the difference. And for the next few months presents plenty of opportunities for us to come together. Global health summits, World Health Assemblies, the G7 and the G20. But as so many people have already said, at the local level, in the national spaces, we also need to make those voices heard. Take advantage of opportunities to name and shame those blocking the way for fairer universal access. So I'll finish by asking you all, if you haven't already, to join the People's Vaccine Alliance and campaign. As an individual, you can visit peoplesvaccine.org to see what action you can take as an individual, but also join us as an organization or individual. You can go to our website to contact us if you want to find out more and more about what can be done. But the People's Vaccine belongs to everyone, and we are thrilled that People's Vaccine campaigns are springing up in different countries, including in South Africa and in Kenya. And we encourage all organizations and individuals to do that as well. We need the campaign everywhere because we need the vaccine everywhere. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, that was excellent. So comrades, here's the rallying call for us all to kind of champion the People's Vaccine campaign in our national spaces globally, and to bring the social weight and strength that all our organizations and movements have.